There are a couple different ways people can go and talk like this. I am limiting myself to a positive approach on why I think it is important that Catholics get out there and participate in the political system of our country. Why I think it is incredibly important that we're out there. And I believe that Catholics should employ both means of accomplishing that, which is the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Why do I think Catholics should be in both? Because at one time or another, either is in charge. And if Catholics aren't there in the one that's in charge, then we lose an important opportunity to shape this country. So I am all for Catholics being in both, because both parties need Catholic values infused into them. They desperately need. And so my point today is to encourage you to take your Catholic values out into the world and be a leaven for our society. And be salt of the earth. Why? Because you have access to the truth in a way that nobody else does. You have access to the truth, Jesus Christ. And your eyes and your heart have been open to that truth. The world is blind to it. And so the world is going to make terrible mistakes. Again and again and again. Are we also? Yes. Sometimes we're blind too. But the grace that we have and the openness that we have to Jesus Christ puts us in a whole new category and gives us gifts of the Spirit, prudence, wisdom, charity, that especially enable Catholics to infuse values that will actually work to promote the common good of humanity. So let's start going through this. I call this the principled approach because the Catholic Church calls it a principled approach. There are two possible approaches, or I'm going to hold up two approaches for going to voting booth. You can do what a lot of people do, a lot of Catholics, unfortunately. Vote according to party affiliation or ideology. That is your principal reason for going and voting. You simply say, I belong to this party, or I support this ideology, therefore I vote this way. I'm not open to reason. I simply vote this way. I'm convinced this is the right way. Other people smarter than me in my party or my ideology have figured all this stuff out. I simply go with what they go. Okay. I've certainly been in that way before. The other possible approach is to vote according to affiliation to the Father. Affiliation to a party or an ideology, or affiliation to the Father in heaven. If you're voting according to affiliation to your party, you promote party or ideological values. That's what you do. If you're voting according to affiliation to the Father, you promote the Son's values, because you are living in the Son. I like the word affiliation. Why? It comes from the Latin word affiliatus, that means adopted as a son. That's what affiliation means. Adopted as a son. You are accepting adoption. Filius means son in Latin. If you make the sign of the cross in Latin, it's in nomine Patris et Filius et Spiritus Sancti. So Filius is son. The question is your principal son and daughtership going to be to your party, or is it going to be to God? Is it going to be to the world, or is it going to be to God? That is the question, the fundamental question. priorities. If, and only if, affiliation with the Father is more important to you than affiliation to any political party or ideology, then the church can help. If the opposite is true, you're wasting your time here and my time, because we cannot help. Go talk to your party. They can help you do what is most important to you. But if affiliation to the Father is more important, then being Christ-like is more important to you. And the church is exactly who can help you do that. John Adams, second President of the United States. We have no government armed with power, capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, these are vices, by the way. Avarice, ambition, revenge, gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Our Constitution does not in and of itself promote a system of values. Not in and of itself. It protects a system of values and promotes the building of those values in society. That's what it does. If people come to our Constitution full of vice, our country will crumble, because there's nothing in the Constitution that can prevent those people from promoting their values. So you have to bring the right set of values to our Constitution for it to function well. Another quote by John Adams: statesmen may plan and speculate for liberty, but it is religion and morality alone which can establish the principles upon which freedom can securely stand. You have to have moral principles upholding the people for liberty and freedom to truly stand in our country. Formers of our Constitution knew this. You had to have religion. If you did not, the moral values would become corrupt. Vice would take the place of virtue, and our country would fail. Here's what our United States bishops say in their document, Living the Gospel of Life. Democracy is not a substitute for morality. A lot of people think it is a morality in itself, nor a panacea for immorality. Its value stands or falls with the values which it embodies and promotes. Only tireless promotion of the truth about the human person can infuse democracy with the right values. This is what Jesus meant when he asked us to be a leaven in society. You and I are uniquely qualified to bring the best values into our society and be the leaven that it needs to counter vice and those things that vice has promoted. We have to bring in virtue and counter vice and promote virtue and build up a foundation. You guys remember the passage where Jesus says, you can either build your house on rock or sand. And what happens when you build it on sand? Wind blows, earth shakes, rain falls, the place goes down. The whole house goes down because the foundation was not strong. If you do not have a foundation, democracy becomes mob rule, and an angry mob, a vice-filled mob, a selfish mob. If you have people who are filled with virtue, it works. Democracy works well. This is why often in the past people wanted kings. This is why the people during Jesus' time wanted a king. A just king, though. If you had a just king, everything was great. If you had a terrible despot of a king, everything was awful. The same can be said about a democracy. If you've got a mob of people in control that are vice-filled, things are going to go bad quick. If they're virtue-filled, things go great. I think democracy works better because, well, we can vote them out pretty quickly before they do too much damage in our country. We have checks and balances. We have the three powers that supposedly check one another, our legislature, our executive, and our judicial branch. And so there are certain things that our founders tried to build in that they thought were better than a monarchy. And I certainly think that they succeeded. However, they did so with the understanding that a moral people would be in charge of running things. Principles. The word principle comes from the Latin word principium, meaning source, or in plural, foundations. So when we talk about Catholic moral principles, we have to use that from a Latin perspective because that's what our church does. And when we say Catholic moral principles, we mean foundational truths. Foundational truths that must be upheld, or everything else that is built upon crumbles. Foundational truths that everything else must be built upon, or everything else crumbles. That's what the church means by Catholic moral principles. These are sound truths that together form our moral foundation. Our moral foundation. So if principles are foundational truths that support our Catholic, our Christian system of values, then Catholic moral principles are foundational moral truths that promote and protect Catholic moral values. Just visualize that as our values are embodied into these principles that make up the foundation, upon which you build structures of society, and you can tear the house down and rebuild. But the foundation remains the same, just in this image I'm trying to give you. You can do additions to your house, you can remodel, you can do all kinds of things upon the foundation. And the whole house will stay sound as long as the foundation is there. That is the idea behind Catholic moral principles. Here's some scriptural quotes from St. Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 10 through 11. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as an expert builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should be careful how he builds, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. Okay? Ephesians 2, 19 through 20. You are no longer strangers and sojourners, but you are fellow citizens with the holy ones and members of the household of God, built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the capstone. Do we say that about every citizen in the United States? Absolutely not. Many people would reject that. But you say this. And so we live according to this. This is our foundation for moral decision making. And the foundation for which we build up our understanding of human life and societal structures. United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, in their document Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, their 2011 version, they update this every election cycle. It lays out moral principles that every Catholic should know and do their best to use as the foundation upon which they build societal structures with moral dimensions. That's important. Not everything you vote on, not every decision that is made on the common good for society is a moral one. But insofar as they have moral dimensions, Catholics need to have these moral values as their foundation in saying, I vote this way or that way on this particular issue because it has a moral dimension and it is in accord with my moral values as a Christian. Catholic moral principles. Now I'm going to lay out the Catholic moral principles that are found in here and other places. And we're going to go through these moral principles. Keep in mind that these moral principles form a unity. They're not separate. They form one foundation in the one person of Jesus Christ. And also keep in mind that these principles can be weighted higher or less so, depending on the issue you're up against. There's a principle in here about immigration, there's a principle in here about the dignity of life. If I'm talking about what to do with immigrants, illegal and legal, the principle of the universal destination of goods, I'm going to tell you what that means, probably weighs more than the dignity of the human person. But maybe not. They're so tied together, right? Mm-hmm. They're very close tied together. But you're going to weight these principles different depending on the moral issue you are tackling. All right? So just keep that in mind as we go through this. These are the foundation for building a better society. First principle, I'm going to give you 9 of them. A good end does not justify an immoral means. Have you ever heard that the ends do not justify the means? You ever heard that? Mm-hmm. Well, that's a Catholic moral principle. As we all seek to advance the common good, it is important to recognize that not all possible courses of action are morally acceptable. We have a responsibility to discern carefully which public policies are morally sound. I put a Bible quote in here. Why not say, as we are accused, and some claim we say, that we should do evil, that good may come of it? And then he gives them a hard time for saying that about Christians. All is reinforcing the fact that we do not use evil means to accomplish good. We simply do not do it. That is a principle. Why does the church stand against embryonic stem cell research? Because you have to kill a human being to achieve the stem cell lines of embryonic stem cell research? Is the church for other forms of stem cell research? Absolutely. Adult stem cell research. I can't remember the different forms, but there's dental, there's umbilical cord stem cell research. There's all kinds of different forms. The one the church is against is embryonic stem cell research because it involves the immoral means of destroying a human being. And you cannot do that no matter how good the end is that they are fantasizing about and never achieved. No matter how good that fantasy is, you cannot pursue it by legal means.
Would that include miscarriages?
No, it would not, because you're dealing with a deceased human being. Okay. There are some things, so do good and avoid evil. Basic principle, all throughout the Bible. Do good, avoid evil. However, when the bishops speak of that in here, they want to bring in what are called intrinsic evil actions. There are some things we must never do as individuals or as a society because they're always incompatible with the love of God and neighbor. Such actions are so deeply flawed that they are always opposed to the authentic good of persons. These are called intrinsically evil actions. They must always be rejected and opposed, and must never be supported or condoned. An intrinsically evil action is an action that no matter what the context is, it's immoral when you do it. There's no way of putting it into a certain context where it's okay to do it. An instance, killing an innocent human being, murdering, I should say, an innocent human being. There's no context where you murder, you intentionally kill an innocent human being. It's either a different act, like self-defense, which is a different act than murder. Abortion is another one. The church never supports abortion, no matter what the consequence. Because the act in and of itself is what I just said. It is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. It's against one of the commandments. The commandments all typically flush out intrinsic evils because it's an act that goes against a divine command. And we must never do it. Do good and avoid evil. Next principle, the right to life and dignity of the human person. Direct threats to the sanctity and dignity of human life, such as human cloning, goes against our dignity. Destructive research on human embryos, those are intrinsically evil. These must always be opposed. Other direct assaults on human life and violations of human dignity, such as genocide, torture, racism, and the targeting of non-combatants in acts of terror or war can never be justified. Those are all intrinsically evil acts. They are contrary to the love of God and love of humanity. The right to life also implies and is linked to other human rights, to the basic goods that every human person needs to live and to thrive. These are basic necessities for life. Food, water, shelter, human touch. We cannot live without these things. They are absolutely fundamental to our needs. And to not respond when our neighbor, this is the story of the Good Samaritan who's bleeding out in the desert, and two walk by and one gives him help. We cannot simply ignore life-threatening needs. We have to respond if we are able. have to. Next principle, universal destination of goods. This principle is based on the fact that the original source of everything is an act of God, who created both earth and man, and who gave the earth to man so that he might have dominion over it by his work and enjoy its fruits. God gave the earth to the whole human race for the sustenance of all its members, without excluding or favoring anyone. So nobody has a claim. That's why we say we're stewards, right? We don't say we own anything. Literally, I mean we do. We own things, but I mean, in our relationship with God and creation, we understand that we are stewards of what God owns, and that God has given to us for our sustenance and nurturing and joy. And he has not singled anybody out as saying, you get more than you. Now we, as human beings, have said that. We have said, you know, we think it's fair that Joe Dokes has worked harder than Pete, and he has amassed a lot of private property now, and it's his by right. What do we say that? Ever heard of eminent domain?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody owns anything in this country, absolutely. Nobody. Because the common good surpasses that of private goods. This is the principle of the universal destination of goods within our own government. So it's already infused in there in many respects. This is called the principle of solidarity. That human beings are social by nature. Remember, I just mentioned one of our basic needs is that we have to be touched.
Mm-hmm.
We will die if we don't experience the touch of another human being. We are social creatures by nature.
They have found out with babies that are in, homes where they're never held or touched or anything, and they just go down physically and mentally.
That's right.
They need touching, loving.
You absolutely have to have touch. We are social creatures. You cannot get around it. God made us that way. Why did God make us that way? Because God is social. It's a trinity of persons. God is social by nature. We are created in his image. Full human development takes place in relationship with others. The family, based on marriage between a man and a woman, is the first and fundamental unit of our society. And it is a sanctuary for the creation and nurturing of children. It should be defended and strengthened, not redefined or undermined by permitting same-sex unions or other distortions of marriage. Big issue, huh?
Wow.
In our society right now. Church is very clear. You must defend and strengthen the family that is based on marriage between a man and a woman as by God's own doing. What did Jesus say when Moses allowed divorce? In the beginning it was not so. In the beginning God created them male and female. And they were to be united forever. And what God had united, man was not to divide. So do we stray from God's plan? Yeah. Do we need people like Jesus and those he sends, and you, me, to say, in the beginning it was not so? We're straying off the path of what God has created. We are one human family, whatever our national, racial, ethnic, economic, or ideological differences. We are brothers and sisters. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers wherever they may be. Loving our neighbor has global dimensions and requires us to eradicate racism and address extreme poverty and disease plaguing so much of the world. Solidarity also includes the scriptural call to welcome the stranger among us, including immigrants seeking work, a safe home, education for their children, and a decent life for their families. Another principle, subsidiarity. The principle of subsidiarity reminds us that larger institutions in society should not overwhelm or interfere with smaller or local institutions. Yet, larger institutions have essential responsibilities when the more local institutions cannot adequately protect human dignity, meet human needs, and advance the common good. This is throughout our society. This is the difference between federal and states' rights, between states and local governments. You see this principle played out all the time in politics. How much should the federal government be involved in state governments? Well, the church's principle here says, insofar as the smaller local governments are capable, they should be the ones dealing with the matter. Because they're closer to the people, they've got local resources, they don't have to mobilize, they know each other, they know the complexities of the issue much better than the larger, more distant government. However, there are times when the local government simply cannot meet it. You know, we think of the disasters. Whenever we have disasters in our country, immediately the federal government has to come to their assistance because they just can't handle the immensity of the issue at hand. Preferential option for the poor, another principle. This is an option or a special form of primacy in the exercise of Christian charity. So we're all called to be charitable. However, there is a special form that we give to the poor. And the whole tradition of the church bears witness to this. So while the common good embraces all, those who are weak, vulnerable, and most in need deserve preferential concern. This is kind of the triage of charity, if you think of a medical term. You know, some people have more serious needs than others, and you have to give them preference because they're going to die soon if something's not done. That's one example of it. Another principle, the dignity of work and the right of workers. The economy must serve people, not the other way around. Work is more than a way to make a living. It is a form of continuing participation in God's work of creation. We participate in that as we work and co-create. It's not simply a punishment, as Adam said, you know, God said, Adam, you will toil the fields. For some reason after sin, work and us do not get along. I know it doesn't for me at times. I don't want to work, especially when I look at somebody with a nice fit body. I say, I want to be like that, but I don't want to do all that work. Holy smokes, they must work hard. All that running and stuff. I want it, but I don't want to work for it. Work is a form of continuing participation in God's creation. Work is a good belonging to all people and must be made available to all who are capable of engaging in it. Full employment, therefore, remains a mandatory objective for every economic system oriented towards justice and the common good. When a person is out of work, how many people have been out of work at some point in their life? There's something about being out of work depressing. It's just out of accord with our dignity. It's just out of accord with our dignity. We feel fully human when we are engaged in the work that human beings do. We feel like we are, I feel, I'll just speak about myself, I feel like I'm contributing. I'm not a charity case. You know, I'm actually I can stand on my own 2 feet. I can help others. I'm exercising my gifts that God has given me. Not for my own good, but also for the good of others. And I'm leaving behind a legacy of something. You know, that I haven't been dead weight in the world. You know, I've contributed to the betterment of people around me. So there's a dignity of work that coincides with the dignity of human. Stewardship of God's creation. We show our respect for the Creator by our stewardship of God's creation. Care for the earth is a duty of our faith and a sign of our concern for all people. We have a moral obligation to protect the planet on which we live, to respect God's creation, and to ensure a safe and hospitable environment for human beings, especially children at their most vulnerable stages of development. We are good stewards. We've been given the gift of the world. We aren't to spoil it. We aren't to pollute it. So far as we can keep it hospitable as we have received it for others to come. We have a great responsibility to do that. Okay, those are the principles. I've laid them out for you. How do you apply them now? Well, above all, you need 3 virtues: charity, prudence, and wisdom. Charity, prudence, and wisdom. A virtue is the opposite of a vice. A virtue is a habit of your person to do good. It's a habit of the soul to do good. How do you develop a habit?
Do it.
Do it again and again and again and again. That's what a habit of the soul is. No different. A virtue is you exercise a virtue again, again, and again and again. So, charity, to develop the virtue of charity, you have to do charity again and again and again and again. And it becomes part of your soul. If you want to exercise prudence, you have to... Prudence is one of those funny things. Prudence is a skill learned through mistakes. It's largely a skill learned through making a ton of mistakes. Because prudence is learning boundaries and limits of what you should do and not do and how to do them. And you kind of have to breach those to learn where those are. Another way is to watch other people make prudent decisions. I remember when I was frightened of public speaking, you know, I'm going through the seminary, oh my God, I've got to talk to all these people. And I get very, when somebody argues with me, and I would listen to these radio casters who would take these people, who would just take random phone calls. And this person would get on there and say the worst things to them. You're a dirty, rotten, no good, blankety blank. The person on this end go, oh, okay, well, you know, let's not get off topic here. Let's stick to you know, and I'm just like, how does he do that? But I would see how effective it was. And I'd say, that is something I want. And I got an idea of how to, you know, what prudence looks like. Because prudence is saying the right thing at the right time in the right way. Okay, and that's a wonderful skill to have, a wonderful virtue. All of these, by the way, are gifts of the Holy Spirit. So we have access to a graced version of all of this. Wisdom. Wise. Wisdom comes with age, for the most part. You have to see a lot. You have to do a lot. You have to hear a lot. And you have to understand a lot. You can pick up wisdom from the wise if you are open to it. And that's why you have certain wise people throughout our ages. Gandhi. Give me some names.
Mother Teresa.
Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Wise people. Confucius, say. These are wisdom sayings. They're wonderful wisdom sayings. There's the old wives, or not old wives' tales, but, you know, moms saying, don't swallow your gum or this will happen to you. Those are wisdom sayings. They are simply things passed on because there's wisdom behind them. Very practical wisdom. Wisdom. You've got to have these virtues. You've got to build them up in yourselves if you can apply these principles well. The principles of the Church's social doctrine must be appreciated in their unity, interrelatedness, and articulation. Are they one? One foundation. Who do they flow from? One person, Jesus Christ. We have to look at them in a unity. Are they interrelated? Is the body of Christ interrelated? They are just as such. It's just a foundation. You have to look at it that way. They hold together or fall together. Articulation. Articulation is an interesting one. It means pay attention to the wording and how the principle is articulated. It makes a difference. If you articulate it incorrect, you can manipulate what the Church is trying to say and the value is trying to uphold. Simply by, and how often do you see this? Persons that want to vote a certain way, or politicians that are dead set against one another, trying to say we both support this principle. Just tweak it a little bit. You've got to pay attention to how it's articulated in the Church. While people of goodwill may sometimes choose different ways to apply and act on some of these principles. I got to say that right away too. People of goodwill can choose different ways to apply these principles. All right? Different ways to build the house. The foundation is the same, but people have different ideas of how the house should be built based upon their own needs. You kind of look through those lenses. However, Catholics can never ignore the moral challenges of all these principles and should never dismiss the Church's guidance when it applies these principles. And the Church says, this is how we feel about this policy, because we looked at the policy, we looked at our principles, and applied our principles. This is what we think you should do. You cannot dismiss that. You should never just say, what does the Church know? In this booklet, in part 2, part 1 is what we've been talking about a while. Part 2, the bishops say, you know, we've got to give our faithful examples of how to apply these principles. So they try and tackle every major issue going on in our society, and they take a stab at it. they try and apply these principles to the major issues, and they lay out what their findings are. What is of a higher importance, the principle or the application of the principle? What's more important, the foundation or the house?
The foundation.
Foundation. So when the bishops give you their attempt to build the house, we have to pay attention. But what's more important is the foundation that is there that doesn't change. Bishops give you an idea of how to build the house. You may have some differences of opinion, okay? Don't dismiss what they've come up with. That's what they're trying to say here.